Okay, so let's make a brief pause in order to provide you with a comprehensive example of play. This is provided by the rulebook and it represents the historical action in December 1941. So in order to gradually incorporate all these mechanics, we'll show you some action, and we are not just watching an example of play, we are rather watching how history itself unfolded in 1941. What we are gonna show you actually happened. So it is December 1941 and the Japanese have decided to launch Operation Z, which is attack on Pearl Harbor. For this task, they will be activating these 4 naval units, which is Akagi, the Red Fortress, Soryu, which roughly translates to Blue Dragon, Shokaku, the flagship, and the battleship Hiei. This is the so-called Kido Butai, as the Japanese called it, which means mobile unit, roughly. And they are using these units that start here and they activate them. As an exception to the rules stated on the Operation Z event, they can move 18 hexes instead of their usual 15. So, starting here in the 37 column, they can reach the 55 column, and they all do so. They reach hex 5506, and for convenience I will be sorting them like this, but they are all considered to be here. And they have to declare a battle hex in Oahu. As you can see, they can reach it with their range of 3 from here, 1, 2, 3. This is Oahu, where Pearl Harbor is located, and we've got the Central Pacific headquarters, which is located here, but for reasons of convenience, again, I'm placing the ground unit here, and there are also this AR unit and these 2 naval units, as well as this long-range bomber unit. So we have a battle here, and as is stated on the Operation Z event, this is a surprise attack. The Allies are caught by surprise. As you can see, the carriers Enterprise and Lexington, fortunately for the Allies, are outside the battle hex. They are out for exercises. And the Allied player will not roll during this air naval combat segment, and their units will be defending at half strength. So New Orleans, for example, has a defense strength of 4. And because it is surprise attack, as we'll recall from the battle chart, the Japanese enjoy a +3 die roll modifier. And as is stated on the event as well, these 2 cannot be attacked. You are only attacking Pearl Harbor, just like historically happened. And in this example of play, the Japanese are rolling an 8, which means a full 1 times result, which means 12 plus 10 plus 14, a total of 36. Here is not a ranged unit like the carriers, it has just come to escort the carriers. So these 36 hits are applied, and they will be reducing this one for 4, this one, which is Maryland, California, for 5 additional. They will also be reducing these 2 units for 5 and 5 respectively. So we've got a total of 19 so far, and there are 17 points remaining. So these 2 are eliminated, this one is eliminated as well, and this one, New Orleans, is reduced for a total of 34 hits. The remaining 2 hits are unused. So this goes to the eliminated units pile, and as you will notice, there is the yellow dot upon it, so it will not be returning later. It starts the 1942 scenario as eliminated from the game, and these ones are removed, but they will be returning as reinforcements. Finally, there is one additional effect for the Operation Z event, which is US political will is increased from 0 to 8. That's where it starts in 1942 scenario. And finally, the Japanese units use again their 18 hexes movement allowance for this particular event to conduct post-battle movement, and they return to Tokyo, which is this one hex. So they are stacked with these remaining units here, and they all form a stack here in 3706 which is Tokyo. And after that, we've got a second event that is played in 1941. So the whole turn 1, which corresponds to 1941, consists of these two events. The second one is Operation Number 1, Conquest of Southeast Asia. During these events, you can activate as the Japanese player any units that are within range of any Japanese headquarters for a total of 26 activations. And the intelligence condition is by default surprise attack. So you've got surprise attack everywhere. You activate a total of 26 units, and the allies do not have any zone of influence during this offensive, so you are free to conduct amphibious assaults and so on. But if they are not in the declared battle hexes and they are within range of the battle hex, the air naval units react. Some more restrictions are that you can only amphibious assault as the Japanese player hexes that are within 5 contiguous water hexes of a Japanese controlled port. So, for example, you can amphibiously assault Miri during this offensive, but you cannot amphibiously assault as far as here, for example, which I'm sure you would like to because this is a resource hex. But that's the restriction, only 5 contiguous water hexes of a Japanese controlled port. Also, if a Japanese naval unit enters any Malaysian coastal hex, Force Z, which is this naval unit, is placed in that hex during reaction movement. Allied chooses if they want to do so. And finally, if you amphibiously assault Manila or Singapore, then you need naval escort, and each naval unit loses 1 step prior to battle, which represents the mines existing in those hexes. So, before moving on with the rules, let's just clarify that the Japanese want to conquer all these areas, the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines and Malaya, because they are rich in resources and the Japanese need these resources in order to be able to draw cards in the game and have the resources to continue conducting the war in the subsequent years. So, reminding, if these 2 hexes are Japanese controlled at the end of the turn, Kuantan and Singapore, then Malaya surrenders, which is 1 political will down for the Americans. Also for Philippines, if you control Manila and this port of Davao, then Philippines surrender, which means -1 more political will for the Allies. And in order to control Dutch East Indies, you have to control all these 7 resource hexes that are all around the Dutch East Indies. So we've got 3 resource hexes that are located here in the island of Borneo, 1 more that is in this island of Java, this is Soerabaja, and 3 more resource hexes that are in Bangka, Palembang, and Medan in the island of Sumatra. And you also have to control the port of Cilacap here in Java, and if you control Cilacap plus all the 7 resources, Dutch East Indies surrender for 1 more political will loss for the Allies. Reminding, the Japanese want to reduce the political will, and if at the end of a turn the political will marker reaches 0, then the Allies automatically lose the game. So let's watch how Japanese historically conducted this offensive. It is December 1941 and they are playing Operation Number 1, Conquest of Southeast Asia. Let's move to Malaya. So we got this one unit, the 25th Army, which is activated and uses amphibious assault movement for 1 amphibious shipping point to move to Kota Baru, which is here. In support of him, the battleship Congo, which is this one, will be moving here to support it. Reminding, first the ground unit has to amphibiously assault and then the naval unit may come to its support. They also activate this one unit, the 22nd Air Flotilla, in support of this invasion. And because this is a special rule for operation IAI, number 1, force Z is placed into that hex as part of the reaction movement by the Allies because it is a Malaysian coastal hex. Also, the 38th Army, which is this one, moves to Kuala Lumpur via these hexes 1, 2, 3, 4, and it captures these two hexes in the process. So these two hexes receive the Japanese control marker because ground units on the move gain control of hexes they pass through. They also gain control of this one, but you don't need to place any control marker because it does not contain anything, port or airfield or anything, so don't bother, just place the control markers here. Also, the 15th Army moves here, which is half a movement point to here because there is the transport route, and also 2 movement points to here because the transport route, this one is a special one, the Kauai Bridge, which has not yet been constructed, and they can only reach here with their 3 movement points. And we have a battle here where the Japanese during the air naval combat eliminate Force Z because this is a 20 factors air unit and this is a 13 factors naval unit, so it's a total of 33. So if you roll a full 1 times result, this is sufficient to deal 20 points of damage, and because this is a surprise attack, most likely they will be dealing this. So reminding that if you look at the air naval combat chart, if you roll a 6 or higher, then it is full times result. So because it is surprise attack, you've got a +3 die roll modifier. So in this case, if you roll a 3 to 9, you will achieve a 1 times result, and this one will be eliminated. So this is what historically happened, and this one is removed to the dead pile. And of course, because this is a pre-war unit, it will not receive any replacements. And after that, we've got post-battle movement, which means battleship Congo, which cannot stay here because this is not a port, moves to Cam Ranh, which is here in modern-day Vietnam, which back then was French Indochina and was controlled by the Japanese in 1941. And this concludes our activations for this theater, which is 5 activations total. And of course you can track those here, like activations remaining. In this case, it would be 26 minus 5. But of course we won't be doing that for this particular offensive because it is too much. And they have used 1 amphibious shipping point so far out of their grand total of 7. And of course you have to conduct all these activations all over the map and then resolve all battles. But we will be resolving this theater by theater. So Malaya is done for now, and let's move on to the next part, which is Borneo. So Mogami, the cruiser Mogami, is activated, and the 2nd SN Brigade is moved to Miri using amphibious assault. This will not use our amphibious shipping point because if they are stacked with a CA or CL or APD type naval unit, this is the so-called Japanese organic transport, which means these ones are carrying the SNLFs and you don't need to use the amphibious shipping point. You just use your 2 activations, and because this is unoccupied, we just gain control of it. So the Japanese resource marker increases from 3 to 4. So let's take a brief pause. The Japanese at this time were controlling these 3 resources from Korea and Manchuria, these 3 resources, and they need much more. So first of all, they secure this resource hex in Borneo, which is Miri. And as a part of post-battle movement, the CA Mogami will return to Cam Ranh. Then we move to Hong Kong, which is this 17th Army is activated and moves to Hong Kong. There is a battle hex declared here, and the Japanese have a -2 die roll modifier because this is a mixed hex terrain. If you closely look, there is this green color indicating that it is a mixed terrain, which means -2 die roll for the attacker or the offensives player. So with their -2, they achieve a 1 times result, which is from 3 to 6. So if you apply the die roll modifier, they roll somewhere between 5 and 9. So 1 times result is enough to eliminate the Hong Kong division, which is 4 and again 4. so their 9 is sufficient to eliminate them. And of course, the higher that the ground unit can roll is 2 times results, which is insufficient in this case for the Hong Kong division to deal any damage to the Japanese. So this one is eliminated as well, and they capture Hong Kong. Now let's move to Philippines. Historically, the Americans had a decently strong garrison in Philippines, but the Japanese were eyeing these islands for a long time. And this garrison was led by General MacArthur of the Southwest Pacific Headquarters. And yes, this is the same Douglas MacArthur that later on during the Korean War suggested the US presidency that they nuke the Koreans with nuclear weapons, but fortunately this suggestion was not adopted. But anyway, right now General Douglas MacArthur is loaded with the impossible task of defending Philippines from the Japanese, and he has to do so with his American garrison. And the Japanese are conducting their operation here, so they activate 5th Air Division from here and 21st and 23rd Flotilla, and they also activate the 1st SN Brigade and use one amphibious shipping point to move to hex 2911, which is this one. So they can do so, of course, because there is no Zoe, but even if there was Zoe, this is neutralized because of the presence of the air division here, 2 hexes away. And they also activate the 14th Army and use amphibious assault for 2 amphibious shipping points to move to hex this one, where this army and this air force is located, this long-range bomber. And we declare a battle hex here, and also CA Takao is activated and moves to this hex to participate in the battle and also protect the ground units amphibiously assaulting. Also, this one unit, Zuiho, the auspicious Phoenix, moves to this hex 2913, which is this one. Also, this army is activated and uses one amphibious shipping point to amphibiously assault this hex. And we have another battle here. This one, reduced army, also uses amphibious assault for one amphibious shipping point to move to Davao, which is here. Additionally, this naval unit, Nachi, moves here. And finally, we've got the CVL Ryujo, which moves here within 3 hexes of the port of Leyte, and it declares a battle here, targeting the US Asia naval unit, and also possibly preventing this unit from reacting if it was a real game. So, let's proceed to the battle resolution. In this hex, we've got these Japanese air units on Formosa in conjunction with Takao, and they are attacking these 2 air units, which is the famous B-17 19th Bomber Squadron and the FIAF, which stands for Far East Air Force Unit. So it is a surprise attack, so all Japanese attacks are resolved first, and if there are any American units remaining, then they can fire back. Japanese strength is 54, because we've got 16 plus 16 plus 22 for a total of 54, but this is all reduced to half because of the use of extended range. Note, the air units could not move here because they are not controlling this airfield yet. We've got an amphibious assault going on, and after the conclusion of the amphibious assault, this hex will be Japanese controlled. So you can only attack from here, which is from extended range. So in this case, the 54 is reduced to 27, and we've also got 12 points for Takao, so the total is 39. And we've got a +3 die roll modifier because of the surprise attack. And historically, the Japanese achieve a half times result, which means with all the die roll modifiers, we are somewhere between 3 and 5. So the original roll should be either 0 or 1 or 2. And in this case, it is modified into 3 or 4 or 5, which is a half times result. So this 39 is divided by half, and it is rounded up for a total of 20 hits. So 20 hits mean this one is reduced and this one is also reduced. I remind you that we could not eliminate some of the two units because we have to first flip both of them to reduce strength. So these units cannot deal any damage even if they deal a full 1 times result for a total of 5 unless they critically hit, which did not happen. And because the Japanese win the air naval combat, because they have more factors remaining in battle in terms of attack strength, so the amphibious assault will take place and we have a ground combat. So this 14th Army attacks the NL Corps. The Japanese get +2 for having naval support in the hex, but because they are not the only ones with air or carrier units, they lose the other +2 modifier, so they get just a +2. The type of terrain is flat, so there is no negative roll modifier. And also the Americans get a +3 because the Japanese entered via amphibious assault. Also, I remind you that because this is an amphibious assault, the Japanese defend at half strength. So conducting an amphibious assault is harder than moving by ground in 2 ways. First of all, the defender gets a +3 on their ground combat die roll, and your defense is halved. So historically, the Japanese achieve a 1.5 times result, which means 27, which is 1.5 times 18. So this means that the final die roll after the +2 modification was 7 or 8. So this is sufficient to destroy the NL course, which only needs 20, 10 and an additional 10, so this is destroyed. But because the ground combat is simultaneous, this guy will also fire and they achieve a 1 times result. So after the +3 die roll modifier, they rolled somewhere between 3 and 6. So they deal a 1 times result, and because it is a 6, they can reduce the Japanese by 1 step because the defense is halved, I remind. So this one is flipped and this one is destroyed and goes to the eliminated units pile. And of course, because this is a pre-war unit, it will not be receiving any replacements. So the Japanese gain control here because they dealt more steps of damage, so they win the ground combat. And even if they didn't, even if it was 1-for-1, because they are the only ground units remaining here, the battle is won and they gain control of this hex, which is just above Manila, and this will further facilitate their conquest of the Philippines later. And during the post-battle movement, these two US air units will use emergency air movement because they are in a Japanese-controlled hex. So the FIAF air unit will be relocated to Manila, and this one long-range bomber will take a long trip to Manado in the Dutch East Indies in the island of Celebes. And I remind you that this emergency movement has to be within normal range or extended range of the air units. Otherwise, we've got a couple more battles to resolve. In this port of Leyte, the Japanese carrier Ryujo attacks at 3 range, so the US Asia cannot fire back because it is not a ranged unit, so only the Japanese player fires. And in this case, Ryujo rolls a full 1 times result, which means after the +3 modification for surprise attack is applied, they roll a modified 6 or more, which reduces the US Asia. And in hex 2915, which is Davao, this critical port, the Japanese conduct air naval combat using the Nachi to fire at the Mindanao Army Corps. Now, let's remind that because there is no enemy air or naval units, this is the only case where the air naval unit of the offensives player can fire at the ground unit. And I remind you that no matter the result, they cannot eliminate the last ground step. So, for example, if there was something like this, 2 ground units of 2 steps each, and Japanese had sufficient attack strength of dealing like 40 points of damage, they would deal 2 hits, for example, to this one and eliminate, and then possibly 10 damage to this one to flip it. but they would not be able to destroy the last ground step. And in this case, it is the reaction player who determines which is the last step. So, for example, in this case, they would select this one unit to be the last step, surviving. Anyway, this is the case here. Nazi is firing at the Mindanao course, and it achieves a one-time result. So it reduces the Mindanao course by one step. And then the 16th Army achieves a 1.5 times result, scoring 14 hits because it is rounded up. So they destroy the Mindanao course, and of course this one has insufficient damage to fire back at the Japanese. And thus the battle is won for the Japanese, and this one goes to the dead pile. And as part of post-battle movement, these naval units, Nachi, Ryujo, and Zuiho, are placed in the port of Davao, and Takao returns to the Tainan hex. The 5th Air Division moves to this hex, just above Manila, and the 21st Air Flotilla moves to hex this one, Tainan. As for hex 2913, we've got this army, the 19th Army, that has amphibiously invaded, followed by the CVL Zuiho, which comes inside hex 2913, and they attack this American Army Corps. Zuiho has got 8 attack factors, which is insufficient to reduce this Army Corps unless it critically hits, which it doesn't in this example. So the air-naval combat is over without any damage. However, the 19th Japanese Army has got a +2 die roll modifier bonus, which is 2 for naval superiority in the hex, +2 for air or carrier superiority in the battle, -2 for the mixed terrain. So whichever die they roll, they get a +2. And in this example of play, they roll a die sufficient to reduce the SL Corps, which means they get more than one times result, which is they roll at least a modified 7 result or more. So we've got a 1.5 times their 9 strength or 2 times their 9 strength, which in either case is sufficient to reduce the SL Corps, which unluckily does not deal any damage to them. So the Japanese are the winner of this battle, and the SL Corps retreats to this hex 2912. The Japanese army remains here, and Zuiho is post-battle moved to Davao. And we've also got the South Pacific Theater, where we are here in Truk, which was an important naval base for the Japanese. The South Seas headquarters is located here, which will be important later on. Right now, all these units are located with South Seas, which is the ships Aoba and Kamikaze, which means Blue Leaf and Divine Wind respectively, as well as these two SNLFs. And we've got this one guy activated with Kamikaze, and this is organic transport again, because we've got an APD type naval unit supporting an amphibious assault. They move together for their entire length of movement, so they do not consume an amphibious shipping point. And they conduct an amphibious assault into Guam, which is unopposed because there is no Zoe nearby, of course. And then Kamikaze will return to Truk. And as for the other units, Aoba will support the amphibious assault of Rabaul, and the Japanese gain control of this later to be very important naval base of Rabaul, and this becomes Japanese controlled again without opposition, and Aoba remains here in Rabaul. Also, we've got the last one operation here in the island of Wake or Wake, and we are activating these 3 units, which is CL-10 Ryu for again organic naval transport, and this SNLF and the 24th Air Flotilla. The 4th SNLF uses amphibious assault to move to Wake Island and declares a battle hex. And also Tenryu moves here. And this can be done because during this event there is no zone of influence for the Allies, otherwise this would not be possible. Notice that there is no way for this air unit from Kwajalein to move anywhere close to 2 hexes from the island of Wake. So there is no legal way of placing a zone of influence here using this plane. So this is only possible during the 1941 turn during Operation IAI. And we've got an air-naval combat during which the Japanese have an attack strength of 9 because it's 4 for Tenryu and 5 for this airplane because it attacks from extended range. And the Japanese add 3 to their die roll for their surprise attack, but because they roll low, they only get a half result. So after the +3 modification, it is between 3 and 5. So they fail to eliminate the VMF 211. And because the Japanese have 9 factors, they have sufficient air and naval superiority because it is just 1 for the Allies and 9 for the Japanese. So the air-naval combat is considered won. So the ground combat will take place during the amphibious assault. And we have to consider again the 2 die roll modifiers, which is first, if you are the only side to have naval units in battle, you get a +2. And if you are the only side with air units or carriers, you get an additional +2. And in this case, the Japanese enjoy a +2 for their Tenryu, which is the only naval unit here, but they lose the air and carrier superiority because there is the allied air unit as well. So they've got a +2, and there is no negative die roll modifier for Wake. It is not jungle, not mountain or anything, it's just an ocean atoll, which provides no negative die roll modifier. So after this +2 modification, they achieve a 1 times result in the ground combat, which means somewhere between 3 and 6. So the 1 times result means 4, but this is insufficient to damage the US Marines. And the Marines roll a 9 in this case, which means 2 times result. And notice that they have a +3 die roll modifier because the Japanese amphibiously assaulted and there were ground units here prior to the amphibious assault. So if they roll 6 or higher, it is treated as 9, which means a 2-time result. So 2 times 2 is 4, and because the strength of the amphibious assaulting units is halved in terms of defense, so their defense strength is 3, so they deal 1 hit to the attackers and they flip them. So the battle is lost, the amphibious assault, for the Japanese. So the Japanese took more losses than the defenders, and they have to retreat, or rather conduct post-naval movement like a naval unit, and they choose to return to Kwajalein together with their naval unit Tenryu, which means Spy Dragon, just for your info. After the conclusion of the offensives phase, which is what we just saw, 1941 is coming to a conclusion, and we have an attrition phase, but there is no attrition phase for game turn 1, so we forego this step, and then we move to game turn 2. So the Allies receive a number of reinforcements, but because the war in Europe is, as previously mentioned, here in the 0 spot, so all these reinforcements go to the delayed reinforcements box, with the exception of this one, the SEAC headquarters, which is a Commonwealth headquarters, the Southeast Asia Command 1, and we place this one in Calcutta, India. And after that, the Japanese place their reinforcements, which is Yamato, for example, the battleship Yamato, and also this one. And because we've got a number of Allied air units that are eligible to be sent to Europe, which is these green ones, you have to make a die roll, and on a 0 or 1 the unit is removed for 3 game turns. And in this example of play, the Allied lose one of their army air units, but in the actual 1942 scenario, the Allies are supposed to be luckier and did not lose any units. So these ones are available in the delayed reinforcements box for the conclusion of turn 2. Actually, they will be entering the game in turn 3. And then we've got the replacement segment. So they do not receive ground replacement per se, but they choose to take one China division, so thematically they are removing some divisions from China in order to reinforce their ground units, and increase one in supply Japanese army ground unit from reduced to full strength. And the Allies receive 2 ground, 5 air, and 2 US naval replacements, which is the one they have for turn 2, plus the one standard which they have if they are controlling Oahu. And with that, they bring these 2 units to full strength using 4 of their 5 air replacement points, and they lose the one unused replacement. And this one is placed in Midway, this one is placed in Oahu, and the 2 US CV naval units, which is the carriers Enterprise and Lexington, which have returned to Oahu, are receiving the 2 naval replacements, so they start the 1942 scenario in full strength, and there are no Allied ground units available to receive the ground replacements. This ends the replacement phase. Now, during the strategic warfare segment, which happens just after the replacements and before the offensives phase, the Allies conduct submarine warfare, so they roll the die, and in this scenario the result is considered to be 2, and it also has got 1 added to it for defective torpedoes. This is for the 1942 game turns, so 2 is modified to 3. And because 3 is higher than 2, which is the current game turn, so actually we subtract the game turn from the die roll, and because the result is greater than 0, there is no effect for submarine warfare. The Japanese draw 7 cards as normal, and they lose no amphibious shipping point. This would be the procedure if we were playing the 1941 scenario, which is not really recommended except as an example of play, because I know for sure that you can perform better than the historical Japanese offensive, and this might result in a very swingy kind of result for the Japanese. So they either may perform much better, or maybe they fail the dice rolls and end up much worse than they historically did. So it is not generally recommended to play the 1941 scenario, other than just for the sake of teaching and for fun. The 1942 campaign scenario is the most usual one, and also there's a whole bunch of yearly scenarios where you play only the year of 1942 and or the year of 1943 or 1944, and then you are determining the endgame result based on a number of factors that contributes to victory points. But I will be showing the rules for the campaign scenario, which starts in 1942 and may span all the way to 1945. So with that, let's move to the map. But before moving to the map, to reward you for your patience so far, let's recite the official declaration of war made by the Imperial Japanese leadership in December 1941, hopefully in good pronunciation and grammar.
神々の助けを得て万世一系の行為を引き継ぐ大日本帝国天皇が忠誠心に厚く勇敢な国民に明確に示す。私はここに米国とイギリスに対して戦争を行うことを宣言する。陸海軍将兵は全力を振るって交戦に従事し、すべての公務員は務めに励んで職務に身を捧げ、市民は各々がその本分を尽くし、1億人の市民が心を一つにして国家の総力を挙げて、この戦争の目的を達成するにあったって手違いがないように期待する。そもそも、東アジアの安定を確保することで世界の平和に寄与することは、大変ご立派な明治天皇やその偉大な考えを引き継がれた大正天皇がお立てに泣いた遠大なる構想であり、私もそれをとても大切に思っているとこである。そのような構想があるからこそ、世界各国と親善関係を維持し、すべての国が共に繁栄していく喜びを共にすることは、これまた日本が常に外国と関係を築く中で最も大切にしている方針である。ところが今は不幸にして米両国と武力衝突を生ずる状況に至った。これは誠にやむを得なかったことである。決して私の希望することではない。 中華民国政府、蒋介石政府は、日本の外交政策の基本的な方針を理解しないまま分別なく抵抗を続け、東アジアの平和を撹乱させて日本に武力行使をさせるように至ってから4年余りが経過した。幸いにも国民政府、王朝明政府に変わった。日本は王朝明政府と善良な隣国として相互に援助し合うようになったが、図形に残存する蒋介石政府は米国及びイギリスから密かに援助を受けてこれに頼り、同じ中国人である王朝明政府とまだ相互にせめぎ合う姿勢を改善しない状況である。米英両国は蒋介石政府を支援して東アジアの混乱を増長し、平和のためという美名に隠れて、実は密かにアジアの覇権を握ろうという道理に反する構想を抱いている。それだけに飽き足らず、米英両国は同盟国を誘発して日本の周辺において軍備を増強して我が国に挑戦的姿勢を示し、さらに日本の平和的な中傷に対してあらゆる妨害を加え、ついに経済断交を行い、日本の存立に重大なる脅威を加えた。私は政府に対してこの事態を平和のうちに解決させようとし、耐久指摘だが、米英両国は相互に友好関係を維持しようという精神はみじんもなく、この状態の解決を先延ばしにして、この間にかえって我が国にとっての経済上や軍事上の脅威がますます増大し、我が国に圧力をかけて隷従させようとしている。このように事態が推移すると、東アジアの安定に関する大日本帝国の積年の努力は水の泡となり、日本の存立もまた危機に瀕している。事態がここまで悪化している日本は、今や自存自衛のため、決意をもって一切の生涯を粉砕するほかはない。私たちには、アマテラス大神から続く皇室の祖先や歴代天皇がおられる。私は国民の忠誠心や武勇を信頼し、歴代天皇の偉業を世に広め、速やかに災難の根源を除去して、東アジアの永遠の平和を確立し、それによって我が国の栄光を保護していきたい。御名御人、昭和16年12月8日。